y'all, and welcome back to another episode of There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani, and today I'm bringing another horrible case to us, so let's just get into it, shall we? Robert Andrew Berdella Jr. was born on January 21st, 1949 to parents Alice and Robert Sr. in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. He was the oldest of two boys and was raised with a strict father and a devout Catholic family. Robert was bullied in his school years due to his nearsightedness, which caused him to have to wear those Coke-style bottle glasses. As a result, he became kind of a loner as he grew up. And as he grew in his teenage years, he realized he was a homosexual. And if you recall, I just said he was born in 1949, so this was not a good time. Also, a direct contraindication to Catholic teachings, again, especially of the time, making it more difficult for him. Then, at 16, his father died of sudden cardiac arrest when he was just 39. And a few months later, his mother remarried and moved in with her new husband. This, Robert had a hard time with, that she just forgot about her husband seemingly and moved on with her life. When Robert began working, a coworker sexually abused Robert, and it was around this time he just turned away from the church. Around the same time, which is 1965, he watched the movie called The Collector, a movie in which a man decides to hold a woman that he found beautiful hostage under the guise of studying her. Later, Robert would say this inspired him for his truly heinous acts. In 1967, he graduated from high school and shortly after moved to Kansas City. There he attended the Kansas City Art Institute. And while he was a great artist, he began abusing drugs shortly after starting school. From there, he moved to selling drugs, the result of which was an arrest for possession of drugs, though it was later dropped. Robert began pushing his art, according to him. He used animals as exhibits, and at one point killed a dog as part of his art demonstration, which of course resulted in expulsion in 1969. After this, he moved to Hyde Park in Kansas City, participating in watch patrols and fundraising events. He even had a short but romantic relationship with a Vietnam veteran. After which, Robert began spending time with young men that had gotten into prostitution, drugs, or were runaways. He would try and help them move on, to get better, to leave their risky lifestyle. Robert became a cook and got into selling antiques sort of as a hobby, turning him into a rather prestigious figure within the community. Eventually, he moved from having just a hobby to opening his own antique selling business, starting in 1982, when he rented a booth at the Westport Flea Market. The name he chose was Berdella's Bizarre Bazaar. At the market, Robert became friends with a man named Paul Howell and his elder son, Jerry. He and Jerry would drink at times. Other times, Robert would give Jerry legal advice, and slowly he began lending him money for various endeavors. Eventually, Robert began asking when Jerry was going to pay him back, but it never seemed like this was going to happen, and Robert became more and more frustrated and angry with Jerry. Then, on July 4th, 1984, Robert showed up at Jerry's door. He claimed he wanted to take Jerry to a dancing contest. Once in the car, he offered Jerry a drink. Jerry took it, drinking the alcohol and, of course, the sedative it was spiked with. Robert drove until Jerry was unconscious, and then Robert took him to his home and injected him with an animal tranquilizer. Then he unclothed Jerry and bound him to the bed. For more than 24 hours, he physically and sexually tortured him. He raped him and sodomized him with inanimate objects, such as cucumbers. Robert continued to give him sedatives throughout the ordeal, and any time he started to rouse. He took pictures and made notes in a notebook. When Jerry was completely out of it, Robert took time off of torture to go to work. Eventually, after midnight on July 5th, Jerry died. Robert later told authorities he was unsure if he asphyxiated on his vomit or stopped breathing due to the amount of sedatives he was giving him. After his death, Robert dragged Jerry to the basement, and in the basement, he hung his body up and opened the jugular as well as the veins in the inner elbow in order to drain him of blood. The body was left overnight, and in the morning Robert went downstairs and cut Jerry up with a chainsaw and a bone saw. The pieces were placed in dog food bags, then wrapped in larger black bags and left out in the trash for pickup. On April 10th, 1985, Robert Sheldon, a 23-year-old, knocked on Robert Berdella's door. He had been evicted recently, and he knew Robert Berdella would help him. So, 2 days later, Robert came home to find Sheldon passed out after binge drinking. Robert added animal tranquilizer to him, just to be sure. And this time he bound Sheldon with piano wire and brought him to the second-floor bedroom. Once Sheldon started to wake up, Robert decided he was going to tell him what was about to happen. Then he injected Drano into Sheldon's eyes, hoping to blind him. He broke his hands, inserted needles into his fingertips, and used caulking to deafen him by putting it, obviously, in his ears. Robert turned on the TV volume to ensure neighbors wouldn't hear anything, and for 3 days he tortured Sheldon, taking photographs and notes throughout this ordeal as well. Then, on April 15th, a contractor came over to work on Robert's house. Robert had forgotten about this, and so before allowing him in, he ran upstairs, put a sack over Sheldon's head, and pulled a rope tight around his neck, killing him. And that was it. At the end of the day, after the worker left, Robert dragged his second victim to the third-floor bathroom and cut him up in the bathtub. He once again placed his victim in dog food bags, then plastic bags, and then put them in the trash. Except for his head, which he took to the backyard that night and buried it. And if you're like me and wondering why he has so many dog food bags, it is reported that Robert has 3 chow chows, and when police eventually find out about this, when they do a search of the home, it is absolutely disgusting. It is said that there is feces everywhere. The dogs basically ran wild within the house. All right, back to this. In June of 1985, one of the boys he hired to do yard work on again and off again, Mark Wallace, got caught in a fast-moving thunderstorm. Robert invited him in to get out of the rain, and since Mark already knew him, he didn't hesitate to come inside. At some point, the conversation turned to drugs, and Robert told Mark he had something that would help him mellow out, essentially. Of course, Mark accepted, and was instead injected with chlorpromazine. And chlorpromazine is technically an antipsychotic medication. It works by blocking dopamine D2 receptors in the brain, which is believed to contribute to its antipsychotic effects. It also, however, affects other receptors, including histamine H1 and muscarinic M1, contributing to its antiemetic and sedative properties, which is what we're looking for here. This is why it's commonly used to help calm and sedate people pre-surgery. It's also called Thorazine. After Mark was out, he was carried to the second floor again and bound. Robert then waited for Mark to wake up and reported again that he was going to tell Mark everything that was going to happen to him. He attached alligator clips to Mark's nipples and shocked him. He inserted hypodermic needles into his muscles. And as with the previous 2, he took photos and documented the entire process. By June 23rd, Mark succumbed to the torture and died. Robert took Mark to the third-floor bathroom and once again used the tub to dismember his body and then took him out to the trash. On September 26, 1985, Walter James Ferris called Robert and asked to stay with him for a short time. Robert agreed, and as soon as Walter was in Robert's home, he gave him a sedative, after which he was tied to the bed And torture began. Walter received electric shock, and this time Robert increased the voltage from his first attack on Mark. Robert not only increased the voltage, but also the amount of time each shock would go on, and he would keep it up for almost 5 minutes at a time sometimes. Robert would insert hypodermic needles into Walter's neck and genitals, and Walter lasted 27 hours. He died as the result of respiratory depression due to the amount of sedatives he was given. As with the others, he was dismembered and taken away with the trash. After this victim, there was kind of a cooling off period that lasted until June 1986. And this is when Robert met up with Todd Stoops, a 21-year-old sex worker. For Todd, Robert didn't use as many sedatives as he had previously. Robert did continue electric shock therapy or torture at this time, and he also did it through his eyes. He starved him, injected Drano into his larynx, raped him, and assaulted him. He, of course, photographed and documented all of it as he had with the others, and it took 2 weeks before Todd died from the torture and starvation. He died approximately the first week of July of 1986. And then in 1987, Larry Wayne Pearson, a 21-year-old, met Robert at the store. Soon, Larry was living at Robert's house, and this was actually going well, not planning on torturing him or anything. That was until Larry went to jail, and on June 23rd, Robert bailed him out. When they got home, Larry supposedly joked about robbing gay men, and this set Robert off. He decided Larry was indeed going to be his next victim. That evening, after many, many drinks, Larry was injected with chlorpromazine and brought to the basement this time. His hands were tied above his head to a column, and Robert immediately injected drain cleaner into his larynx. Then electric shocks began. Larry attempted to cooperate, taking the rape and torture without, complaining, screaming out, crying, and he even had his right hand broken and didn't resist. By day 5, Larry was brought up to the second floor. Still, the torture continued for 6 weeks, during which time everything was continued to be photographed and documented. On August 5th, Larry supposedly couldn't take the torture anymore and at this time decided to fight back, which pissed Robert off, so Robert beat him until he was unconscious, then placed a bag over his head and suffocated him. Larry was brought back down to the basement and he was dismembered. He took the body to the trash except for Larry's head, and that night he went to the yard and dug up Robert Sheldon's now skeletonized head and replaced it with Larry's. Robert then took Sheldon's skull into the house, cleaned it, and removed the teeth. Then he placed some of the teeth into individual envelopes and placed them around the house, and he put the skull basically in the back of his closet at that point. On March 29th, 1988, Chris Chryson, a 22-year-old sex worker, met Robert as he was cruising in his car. Robert suggested they go home, and shortly after they arrived, Robert then suggested they go upstairs. Again, he says that it was owing to the chow chows and how annoying they were and loud. As they went upstairs, Robert grabbed an iron bar and hit Chris in the back of the head, rendering him unconscious. He was taken to the second-story bedroom, where he was stripped, bound, and unfortunately the torture began. Robert put a dog collar around Chris's neck and beat him with an iron club. Supposedly, this was to try and break his limbs. He used tranquilizers and antibiotics on Chris as he photographed and documented his torture. Robert even put swabs with alcohol and later ammonia into Chris's eyes, again trying to blind him. He would inject him with Drano in his throat. And as per his normal routine by this time, he used electric shock. Chris tried to gain Robert's trust and would attempt to talk to him. By day 3, he did convince Robert to loosen his bindings on his arms, and then in time had them placed in front of him rather than being strung up over his head. But Robert wasn't stopping the torture. He even brought out pictures of other men that he had tortured and killed and showed them to Chris, essentially telling him he was eventually going to kill him. When Robert left, Chris started requesting the TV be on when Robert was gone and was given the remote. He was also given cigarettes and matches. When Chris realized Robert left one day, he managed to get an arm free. Then, he used the matches to burn the ropes around him. Once he was free of the bindings, he broke out of the window and jumped, breaking a bone in his foot. And supposedly the reason he did this is he wasn't sure if he was actually gone or if there were traps in the house or the Chow Chows would get him. And so he just jumped out the window, knowing that it was on the second floor. From there, he ran across the street, and a meter reader saw him, but ignored the naked screaming man asking for help. Luckily, a neighbor was a better person than them and called the police, though they were hesitant and didn't let him in the house because he was naked and very badly, bruised and cut up everywhere. Chris told responding police that he had been abducted and the ordeal he went through. His visible injuries certainly lined up with what he was saying. So 2 of the 4 responding officers took Chris to the hospital, while the other 2 started to get a search warrant for Robert's address. During further questioning at the hospital, Chris told police of the torture, the Polaroids taken, as well as those Polaroids that Robert had showed him of other men. Later that day, Robert was arrested on charges of sexual assault, and when they got the search warrant, search of the home revealed the burnt ropes and electrical transformer Chris had spoken along with a plethora of syringes, sedatives, swabs, and eye drops. In the master closet, Robert Sheldon's skull was found. In one of the hallways were several vertebrae, and, of course, like I said, several envelopes were found around the house with teeth in them. In the basement, there was a hacksaw, miter saw, and chainsaw, all with blood, flesh, and pubic hair still stuck on them. Overall, 350 Polaroids were found in the house, along with notebooks detailing the torture of all his victims. In the yard, Larry's head was found. On July 23, 1988, Robert Berdella Jr. pleaded guilty to the murder of Larry Wayne Pearson in front of Judge Alvin Randall and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. From there, he was moved to Missouri State Penitentiary and shortly after to Potosi Correctional Center under protective custody. He had been attacked a few times while he was in custody. In August, he pled guilty for forced sodomy of survivor Chris Bryson and received a second life sentence. As for the rest of the charges, at first Robert pled not guilty, as he was under the possibility of receiving the death sentence. After receiving a deal, however, the death penalty was removed, and Robert, in the deal, was to detail exactly what had happened to all of his victims, which is how we know what happened. It even included explaining his shorthand and abbreviations that he had written throughout his notebooks. On October 8th, 1992, just 4 years into his sentence, at 2 p.m., Robert was sent to the infirmary after complaining of chest pain. He received medical care and after an assessment was transferred to the local hospital. But by 3:55 p.m., the 43-year-old was pronounced dead. Of this, Judge Randall would later say, quote, "couldn't have happened to a nicer guy," end quote. And that is the horrific story of Robert Berdella Jr. and his time being known as the Kansas City Butcher. To all those out there listening, be careful. It's a dangerous world we live in.